I mean, the Chinese today, Joe, are saying that they hope that the U.S. will now stop this practice of unilaterally hiking tariffs.
The consensus from both delegations is that neither side wanted a decoupling, he said. So the conclusion is that both sides have a shared interest and neither side wants a decoupling. I thought a decoupling was the whole point here. Onshore jobs, bring manufacturing back, protect the American workers. But alas, no.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hey, it's Ashley Bishop with Status Coup. In the latest manic tariff news, apparently the short-term pain has become too much for the Trump administration, and Trump announced this morning that the tariffs on China, the 145% tariffs on China, will be lowered to 30% for 90 days while the two countries attempt to hash out a trade deal. So again, we will still have tariffs on China. They will just be lowered from 145% to 30% for 90 days. What happens after this 90 days? Nobody really knows right now. But apparently the markets are very pleased with this. So this was on Morning Joe this morning.
All right. And Caddy, if you look at the numbers in the lower part of the TV, you have actually the markets responding very positively up. It looks like up about 2.5% right now. The stock market had gone from like 45,000 down to 36,000, clawing its way back up over 42,000 this morning in pre-trade numbers. But obviously, it was a concern about high tariffs on China that was dragging the market down in large part. Looks like Wall Street, at least early this morning, sees this trade deal as very good news.
Yeah, and particularly those tech stocks, so dependent on Chinese imports as well. I mean, the Chinese today, Joe, are saying that they hope that the U.S. will now stop this practice of unilaterally hiking tariffs. A lot of America's allies and trading partners wondering if this is it now. Can they kind of go back to the status quo ante and assume that there's going to be a normal trading relationship with America, because there's still a lot of uncertainty about what that 90-day pause actually means.
So great for big business and Wall Street and the elites, but as was just said, this is just a 90-day pause. There is no guarantee that a trade deal will be reached during that time. The CEO of Ford said, I think just last week, that tariffs would be here to stay for at least 3 years. So I don't fully know what to make of all of this. And even if they are down to 30% for right now, that is still a lot for small businesses to actually weather. We have flip-flopped so many times on tariffs that if you are a small business that's trying to plan and make hiring and firing decisions, how would you actually be able to do that? How would you be able to make any kind of production plans if you don't know what kind of raw materials are actually available to you, where you can manufacture things? It is impossible to do that if there is so much uncertainty. And if you are a big business that's already thinking about laying off workers and replacing them with AI, this provides you the perfect cover to do so. Just because tariffs have been rolled back does not mean that any of these workers who have been laid off at places like Stellantis will get their jobs back. They most assuredly will not. So working people's lives have been thrown into upheaval, but the markets are happy. So it's fine. Everyone's all cheered up because the markets are doing just great this morning. So here are some more specifics on the tariff pause from the New York Times this morning. U.S. and China agree to temporarily slash tariffs in bid to defuse trade war. The White House backed off from the steepest levies as the cost of an all-out trade war with China threatened global economic growth. So the United States and China on Monday took a step to defuse the trade war threatening the world's two largest economies, agreeing to temporarily reduce the punishing tariffs they have imposed on each other. The move by the United States after President Trump had repeatedly declared that he would not lower tariffs without concessions from China represented an acknowledgement of the cost of an all-out trade war with China. Despite the White House's bluster, the Trump administration ultimately backed off, for now, from the steepest tariffs and agreed to hold more formal talks with Beijing after companies and consumers started showing signs of economic strain. We're not looking to hurt China, Mr. Trump said at the White House on Monday. Explaining that the tariffs that he imposed remain in place, Mr. Trump said that talks would be focused in part on opening up China to American businesses. He said that he expected to talk to President Xi Jinping of China later this week, but that putting a full deal on paper would take a while. We are not looking to hurt China, Trump says. More like, we are hurting so much that we have no choice but to start backpedaling, essentially. We concluded that we have a shared interest, said Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent at a news conference in Geneva, where U.S. and Chinese officials met over the weekend. The consensus from both delegations is that neither side wanted a decoupling, he said. So the conclusion is that both sides have a shared interest and neither side wants a decoupling, says Scott Bessent. I thought a decoupling was the whole point here. Onshore jobs, bring manufacturing back, protect the American workers. But alas, no. Also, I know it's really hard to remember this far back, but fentanyl was the initial excuse for these tariffs on China. So I don't know what has happened with that. And as to having a shared interest, do we really need to go through this short-term pain just to conclude that China and the US, whose economies are irrevocably intertwined with each other, have shared interest? To be clear, I think shared interest here means that the US realizes it is utterly dependent upon China and the cheap goods it manufactures for us at the expense of their workers and their environment. Our economy, our lives function as they do, largely because we have access to these cheap goods, to this cheap labor. Remember when hospitals couldn't get PPE during the height of the pandemic because it was all manufactured in China, and just general supply chain chaos during that time? This was not that long ago, and there was all of this talk about bringing manufacturing back to the US. I thought the lesson there was, again, we depend far too much on China and that it is not sustainable. Did we really need to start seeing store shelves empty out again to remember this from just 5 years ago and then frantically backpedal on the entirety of the thing? I mean, if this administration is worried about the US looking, weak on the world stage, this was a pretty transparent and pathetic admission of how little leverage we actually have in this moment. And more on this piece. China said it will suspend or revoke countermeasures adopted in retaliation for escalating tariffs. In early April, the Chinese government had ordered restrictions on the export of rare earth metals and magnets, critical components used by many industries, including automakers, aerospace manufacturers, and semiconductor firms. Mr. Bessent said the two countries may discuss purchase agreements of American goods by the Chinese government. Such a deal could help narrow the American trade deficit with China. So, free trade as long as it is benefiting the U.S. And if it is not, then no free trade. It would seem like China's so-called countermeasures on these tariffs were pretty effective. Those rare earth minerals are extremely important components in your phones, computers, cars. A shortage of rare minerals really kind of screws the U.S. If your computer breaks and you need to buy a new one, but suddenly you are completely priced out of the market for new computers, or there are wait lists and the price of a secondhand computer goes way up, just like we saw with used cars during the pandemic. How are you going to work? How are most of us going to pay our bills? When Bessent says, the two countries may discuss purchase agreements of American goods by the Chinese government, such a deal could help narrow the American trade deficit. He is really softening his tone here. It is hard to be very aggressive when you don't have cards. No cards, no leverage, just a shadow of a once powerful nation. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. In a research note, Mark Williams, chief Asia economist for Capital Economics, said the agreement was another substantial retreat from the Trump administration's aggressive stance because it does not include any commitments by China on its currency or trade imbalances. He also noted that there is no guarantee that a 90-day truce will give way to a lasting agreement, especially if the United States continues trying to rally other countries to limit trade with China. And it goes on, from China's perspective, the outcome of this meeting is a success, as China took a tough stance on the U.S. threat of high tariffs and eventually managed to get the tariffs down significantly without making concessions, he said. Mr. Bessent and Jamieson Greer, the U.S. trade representative, said the two countries had substantive discussions on U.S. demands that Beijing crack down on the trafficking of the chemical ingredients used to make fentanyl. Mr. Bessent said that the Chinese understood the magnitude of the fentanyl crisis in the United States and that there is a positive path forward. Yes. So we are back to fentanyl. I mean, come on. I haven't heard a damn thing about fentanyl in months. The closest we have had to talking about the opioid crisis was the announcement that despite his own history with drug addiction, RFK plans to end a federal narcan distribution program credited with a steep decrease in deaths due to overdose. Narcan is an overdose reversal drug and, again, has been extremely effective in reducing opioid-related deaths, especially to fentanyl. So it's so important that we are ending a $56 million annual grant that trains first responders on how to administer Narcan and also distributes it. So something doesn't quite add up here. It's almost like the fentanyl crisis was just an excuse all along. The two sides have sparred in public in recent weeks. The White House repeatedly said it was speaking with Chinese officials, while Beijing denied that such talks were taking place. Since the tariffs were announced, China has taken many punitive measures against the United States. It suspended imports of sorghum, poultry, and bone meal from American companies and added 27 firms to the list of companies facing trade restrictions. On Monday, even as China agreed to roll back punitive measures it has imposed over the past month, multiple Chinese agencies, including the Ministry of Commerce and the Ministry of State Security, met to discuss how to strengthen export controls of strategic minerals. In a statement, the European Chamber of Commerce in China said it was encouraged by the announcement, but that uncertainty remains because the tariffs are only temporarily suspended. Yeah, again, China's countermeasures worked and we folded. This does not sound like a good business strategy to me. And China hasn't been unscathed by this. Clearly, they also rely on us to buy the cheap goods that they are producing for us to buy. But it seems pretty apparent who was the first to cry uncle here. It was us. It was the US. And it's not going to be an instant return to whatever was considered normal before the tariffs either. Shipments are still down and port activity is still low. And it's going to remain that way even with a pause on tariffs. As I've talked about in other videos, there is a lag of several weeks before we start seeing the effects of shipping activity. So we are just now starting to really see the store shelves emptying like people said that we were going to. I saw a lot of videos on social media this weekend of people's, like local big box stores like Costco, just again, looking pretty sparse. This is going to accelerate over the next few weeks before we would even begin to see new shipments reaching our ports. And as always, it is working people who have borne the brunt of this power play between the US and China. Small businesses are still going to struggle under 30% tariffs, and 90 days is not long enough to be able to make any kind of future plans, and who knows what's going to happen after this 90-day pause. People have been laid off. I suspect that they're probably not going to easily find new jobs either, with hiring freezes at many companies because of the economic uncertainty, because again, of the tariffs. And the cheap goods we need to keep our lives going are going to become even more scarce for who knows how long. This short-term pain seems to have stung a bit too much for the Trump administration, and the long-term game seems as uncertain as ever for working people. Thank you for watching. We will stay on this story, and you can help us to do that by becoming a paid member at statuscoup.com/join. You can do that for as little as $5 a month. So thank you guys, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye.